one of the most popular terms at the moment is the circular economy, and I think this is a great way to be able to discuss while we have someone like Bernadette here on the panel, and how we can collaborate in the fibre industry here in New Zealand to tell that reusable story.
Well, with the Textile Reuse Programme, that's a collaborative model. So it started with 6 of New Zealand's largest corporations, and as we did the research and the trials and the feasibility studies, so not to overwhelm the system, we kept it with those 6 corporations, but now we're opening it out. And I think New Zealanders are kind of natural collaborators, but also we've got a really small market. So, and some of this stuff is really, really hard, so in order to advance within it, we have to collaborate. So we're finding, like with uniform suppliers, they're starting to work together within the program, and there's a lot of learnings between people.
And in collaboration on the research element when you're dealing with food and fibre. Stewart, what sort of work are you seeing coming through and inquiries from the hemp industry into AgResearch?
Yeah, the hemp's an interesting area for us because strictly speaking, hemp production is not a core activity in pastoral agriculture, but we have an interest in it from the fibre perspective, but also in the sense that it might fit into a pastoral agriculture scheme. It's a multi-purpose crop. It's got the fibre component, the food component. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
And Richard, on that, one of the questions William Oliver asks is, do the food and fibre components of hemp work well together? So if you produce the food, you're producing hemp for food, does that affect the fibre quality, or do you have to be the other way around?
Great questions, and this is the start of a journey of acquiring this sort of information and working in a collaborative sense with industries that already exist, because we can only supply our fibre and our seeds as part of a raw ingredient into these existing industries. So as far as a dual crop goes, yes, it is possible to grow both for fibre and seed, but because you're growing for seed, you have to go all the way through the growing cycle. So therefore the energy's gone into the flowering top of the plant with producing the seed. So some of that energy has been detracted from the stem. So you might end up with a very hard and brittle fibre towards the end. And so, if you wanted a different spec for a different end use, then you might consider growing just a fibre crop and taking that off the land after 90 days rather than 120 days.
Peri, what about in your experience where you're blending fibres, the process for people interested, and there's questions here around alpaca, cashmere, and having those blends with something like hemp. What do you think New Zealand needs to be doing better to foster and also invest in those types of experiments, I suppose?
That's really interesting because, as you're probably aware out here, that we don't process most of our wool on shore. What we like about the idea for cashmere, which I was talking about before, is that we can completely process that from end to end. So it comes off the farm and goes right through the process and into a garment out the other side. But so I think we're all looking for different ways to blend different fibres. But I do make the point that there's nothing better than using less in the first place, because recycling, upcycling, it all takes energy, and generally, on the whole, you're ending up with a product that I suppose it goes into a different category. So we are starting to use blends of wool and say organic cotton with garments that have been recycled and taken back down to the fibre and blended up again. So I'm not sure I've answered the question or answered some questions you didn't ask.
There's a great question here from Bree Fick, who talks about embracing the hemp production while avoiding monoculture. There's a lot of discussion lately around diversifying land use, and this can certainly be one of them. But how do we work that into our current farm management systems with hemp? Is one question, and also avoid a monoculture of everybody jumping on the bandwagon and swapping out arable crops for hemp.
Yeah, two very interesting questions. So the first one, we plant in maybe between October and December, and we harvest in March to April. So we are a rotation crop, so it would be available to as an alternate arable land use for farmers to consider in their rotation. Again, studies need to be done on what effect it has on the follow-on crop. Does it improve the yield? There's other reasons to grow hemp that would actually suggest that you can use it as a phytoremediator. So that's using plants to help condition and clean soils that have been polluted in the past. So there's other reasons to grow apart from products. But in the sense of getting everybody on the bandwagon because it's the next green rush and things, there will be a bit of an element of that. We do, having been exposed to the overseas markets, the economics of what's happening overseas has to be considered. So it may be that some people will slow themselves down a little. That said, though, it's all about managing the scale and demand, because we can't get into some industries until we have a significant scale. So this is a real challenging part of the industry. In 10 years' time, it'll be, hasn't it always been here? And we're not surprised that there's Frontier-sized hemp businesses around, but at the moment it is about managing or trying to help with that matching of the supply and demand into industries where we can have a use, because we can't expect industries to change overnight and accept us as a whole raw material, but allowing us as part of that raw material can really work wonders.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got a lot of questions coming through, thank you, on hemp. And we'll move on to some other parts of it. But to go off the back of you controlling the supply and demand, Mayor Craig Rowley has asked about the disincentivization around the licensing of growing hemp. And for those of you who are not familiar, in the late part of last year, it was become possible to grow hemp and sell as a food product. But the licensing, I understand, is from the fear of the THC cannabis element to it. Is it not, or is that an industry trying to straight away self-regulate so that we don't get that?
Well, the reasons why we had to do the trials were to overcome the fear that the government had about people planting marijuana plants in their hemp field.
Yep.
And to answer that, you can do it, but there's no point, because the hemp pollen from the male plants will pollinate the marijuana plant and reduce the potency over time. So that solves that problem. We could do the police's job. All we've got to do is grow hemp everywhere in New Zealand. The other side was around, was it going to be diverted? Was somebody going to jump the fence, steal a hemp plant and pass it off as marijuana? Well, that's a short-term attitude for anybody selling marijuana, I would have thought, because no one's going to get high off it. So both of which didn't happen in the trials and haven't happened since. So those are non-issues, really. Actually, the licensing regime and the way the regulations work is a very enabling piece of legislation. So it enables industry, and they realised when they were drafting them that they didn't have all the answers. They couldn't put everything in there about the diversity of end users. So they had to leave them a little open and allow us to grow hemp to make hemp products. And to get the licence, there's two types, a general and a research and breeders. It's $511. They're location specific. They last a year but can be extended twice, so you can get 3 years out of them. So it's not a hard compliance cost to achieve. And really it's about your location being safe. So how can you prove that your location isn't going to be, somebody's not going to jump the fence? So generally that's about not being visible from the road. So these are pretty easy to comply with, really.
Well, there's actually a direct question to you, Peri, from Gary. And Gary asks that Bill Clinton must be a fan of Untouched World. And has that had a flow-on effect? And how much influencer marketing is now a very big part of telling the New Zealand fibre story?
Bill was very, very good to us, and he still is very good to us. In fact, the whole family are. And it doesn't hurt to have someone like that supporting one's brand. I think potentially Barack Obama's wearing our garment in an image that went global has probably had even stronger impact. But you can't really very easily orchestrate these things. They happen. Yeah.
Yes. Stewart, I just wanted to go a wee bit further in what you can and can't talk about, which is really exciting in the wool research space around deconstructing fibres into food and skincare.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what you can talk about?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of research going on in that space at the moment. And I guess what it is all about is trying to find ways of exploiting those attributes of wool that I talked about, but in different types of product spaces, so not in the traditional areas of textiles and floor coverings and that type of thing. But by taking the fibre apart, you can use components of it to provide functionality in different ways. Work that we've done that's looked at wool that's been broken down to the point where it can be used as a nutritional supplement in pet food, and you may have seen some stories about that work recently. And we're also involved in research that looks at how you can convert the wool fibre into other types of materials. So using it using that keratin as a biomaterial rather than in its native form as a fibre. And then that opens up a whole lot of potential other markets that are quite high value. And it's those kind of high value markets that we need, particularly for crossbred wool, to really lift the demand for it and to shift the wool price upwards for that type of wool.
It's only one way up. We're getting quite close to zero. I just wanted to spend the last part of this panel just running through each of you. My broad brush question to all of you is, the people that are in this room are in influential positions across industry, government, research. What is the most frustrating thing for you that you face in the next 18 months, and what would you ask of industry to be more supportive of? Same with you, Richard. I like curly ones.
Loaded. It's regulatory risk. Business doesn't like uncertainty, and everything we seem to do is uncertain. We operate in a bit of the grey area from time to time, and if that was removed, then that would be a real boom for us as an industry, because it would attract the people that are sitting there and watching. They would actually become involved, and they need to be involved because there's so much opportunity out there for Kiwi ingenuity. We either have the ability to create the tech and the products in New Zealand, or we have to license that ability into New Zealand. So right about now is a real critical time for us to make that decision to enable the industry, and that's got to come from the top. I've noticed it's not trickling up with the people involved in government. So if it could come from a champion and trickle down, that would be great.
Lots of people from MPI here too, Richard. Stewart, in regards to research, funding support and commercialisation.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, funding support. Taking a long-term view of research. The research process is something that takes many years to come to fruition. And while we're very happy to do short-term R&D that is very product-focused, if we want to transform industries, then that needs to be longer-term. It needs to go with stability for multiple years, and it needs the support of an industry that comes together collectively to support that work.
Peri, your thoughts?
Probably our most frustrating point is one that's pretty hard to deal with, and that's just the volatility of the Kiwi dollar. We are a net exporter, and we choose to produce here, and will predominantly produce here, and that's something that we know we can't know about. And we have incredible volatility in our raw materials. So there's not a lot MPI can do about that, I don't think. Yeah.
Bernadette?
I don't know that I'm terribly frustrated about that much there. Like when we started, we were so far ahead of the market 11 years ago, and there's been this rapid evolution, and I actually feel really optimistic rather than frustrated. If you ask someone else in my team, their frustration will probably be around the Ministry for the Environment's reporting and the compliancy over that. It's the same for if you get 50,000 or if you get 5 million, but that doesn't sit with me, so I'm not the one that's complaining about it.
That's fantastic. I'm just going to wrap it up. There's a lot of questions here with regards to hemp, so Richard will be able to take a lot of those away, and of course again to get in touch directly with any of the. If I could have a round of applause please for our wonderful panel.